I was going to move this forward, but then I see she set the camera up, so I can't move that forward, and I'll come to you instead. Right. So Esther. We're going to talk about Esther for the next 2 weeks. We all know about Esther because, that lovely verse, which is, if I live, I live. If I die, I die. If I perish. So I've looked at the whole story, and I'm going to divide it into 2 bits. And today I'm going to speak about when opportunity knocks, and next week is for such a time as this. Okay? So I'm going to look into the story of Esther and try to put in some context so that we can understand. Okay? Many years ago, there was a program. It started in the 50s, I believe, even in the 40s, on the radio called Opportunity Knocks. And then it started in the 60s. They started putting it on television. And some of you remember them from the 70s and 80s and that, when it was kind of like Britain's Got Talent, but it was in those days when opportunity knocks. And it was like a talent show. You could come, you could do something. And they actually discovered people. And they discovered quite a few people, actually. It basically was a talent show. I think Freddie Starr was discovered in there, Sue Pollard, Little and Large, Darren Day, and there was a myriad of other people that were discovered on Opportunity Knocks. And the whole point of the program, just like Britain's Got Talent, is like you can come with what you have. You've got your 2 or 3 moments of fame, and then we'll see if we vote for you. And then quite often that was the thing that catapulted them into stardom. And our TV is full of that kind of stuff nowadays. But anyways, when opportunity knocks. So looking at Esther, I just wanted to set the scene of when Esther was set. So if I just go over it like a story, which will make it easier for you to understand, it helps me understand it. So, all the Israelites, we've got David and all of his sons and all that kind of stuff, and there's been a king, and then the next son, Solomon, becomes a king and all of that. So that's all of them. They're all doing well. And then they start rebelling and they start going away. Then God starts sending prophets and saying, if you don't listen, if you don't obey, I am going to send you into captivity. And so that's exactly what happens. They, after many years, Jeremiah's prophesying, and then Nebuchadnezzar comes down. He takes everyone captives. He burns Jerusalem, tears it all down, and he takes all these people captive to Babylon. Okay? So they're all in Babylon, and in that captivity is Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and all of those people. So we kind of know the story. That's where it's all happening. When the story of Daniel in the lion's den, Daniel is an old man when he is thrown into Daniel in the lion's den. There's been 3 different kings. There's been King Nebuchadnezzar, there's King Cyrus, and there's King Darius. And so it's in King Darius's reign that Daniel is thrown into the lion's den. And he's in the lion's den, and King Darius is devastated. He didn't want him to be there. He's almost been tricked into it. And King Darius comes and he shouts in, and he said, the next morning, he says to him, then King Darius sent this message to the people of the whole world. When he got there, he said, Daniel, are you alive? And he realizes Daniel is alive. And then King Darius says, I'm sending a message to everyone of every race in my kingdom. So this is the kingdom of Persia, where everyone is. And the kingdom of Persia goes from Libya all the way to Pakistan. It's a huge area. And because God saved Daniel, King Darius issues a decree and says, I decree that every people of every race, nation, and language throughout the world, which was his world, you need to follow God. Peace and prosperity to you. I decree that everyone should tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God and he will endure forever. His rule will never end. He rescues and saves people. He performs miracles. So he realizes that the God that Daniel serves is the true God, and he decrees this decree around his whole kingdom, this whole area. You're going to follow God, so that's fine. And also during that time, after they've been there for a while, they probably, King Darius said, well, some of them were like, I want to go back. And they're like, yeah, okay, we'll let you go back. King Cyrus says you can go back. So Ezra takes a group of the Jews back to the place, and they built up the temple. And then Nehemiah, we looked at Nehemiah, he takes a group back because he's going to build up the walls. But most of the people actually didn't go back. A lot went back, but a lot of people settled. They had lived there for 70, 80 years by now. They have lived in Persia. They have become accustomed to Persia. They've got their families there. They've got second and third generation children there that actually know nothing about the Jews. And so they're living there. They're very contented. And in this world, we find Esther. Okay? So that's where she is. She is in this world that has never been to Israel and has lived away outside of Israel for about 100 years. And so I find it interesting. The word in the book Esther, you will not find the word God. God's word, God is not mentioned in the book, but his fingerprints are over everything. So his name isn't mentioned, but his fingerprint and his breath is over everything that happens. And it really is a rags to riches story. It is a Cinderella story. This poor orphan girl then becomes the queen of Persia. I mean, they reckon there was, was it 50 million people that lived at that time in this whole empire. And when we look at the beauty pageant, if you think, well, 50 are men, 50 are women, there must have been 25 million people that could have gone forward to become a queen. And she is selected. And I think it's amazing that in this huge empire, God has not forgotten. He is watching these two people. There's Esther, and she's been orphaned, and she's got her uncle. Her uncle is called Mordecai. And Mordecai is her uncle, and he has raised her. He has adopted her, and he has raised her. And they're there, and God in heaven is looking around all this thing. He's watching the Jews. They're building the Jerusalem. Things are happening, but he notices these people. And he notices them because he knows that things are not good for his Jewish people. Because although King Darius decreed this and said, everybody must worship God, it made it very good for the Jews living there to worship God. But Darius died. And when Darius came, he was a real conqueror and conquered large areas of the land. When he died, then his son, which was King Ahasuerus, but he's called King Xerxes, okay? And this king is now in charge of the land. And it's up to him. He has to go and try to get more land and conquer Greece, and he doesn't manage to do it. So he's now thrown this massive, massive party for everyone in the kingdom because he's trying to stir up a larger army so that they can go and fight Greece. And so this huge group of people, amongst them is people who don't really love God. Persia didn't love God. King Darius made it simple for them to love God. Some have accepted him, but the majority of the people don't love God and don't follow him. And the second in command, so you've got King Xerxes, his second in command is a man called Haman. And Haman has great influence over this king. And Haman hates the Jews. Everywhere in society, we find people that hate the Jews. You even hear it today. You'll hear this word anti-Semitism. It's everywhere. There's pockets. It's just something that's happened since the beginning of time. You look back over history, over world history, there's times when the Jews have been the Pharaoh tried to kill them, and then this tried to happen, and then Herod tried to kill them, and then Hitler tried to kill them. There's always been that. And this man is influencing this king. Even though his father was King Darius, he doesn't have this faith of his father. And so that's where we find the story. So that's a little bit of the background of where we are. There's 4 characters in this story. There's Esther, the orphan girl. There's Mordecai, her uncle. There's King Xerxes. And King Xerxes, if you were to translate into English, is King of Kings. We know who the real King of Kings is. And then there's Haman, who's second in command, okay? So this is where we find it. And the emperor has decided to throw this massive party. The emperor invited all the governors, aides, and army officials, bringing them from every part of the country. The celebrations lasted for 6 months, a tremendous display of his wealth and glory. And at the end of that, he has a party for 7 days. And it speaks about in the Bible that it's just a drunken orgy. And he calls for his wife to come and display herself. And she refuses. She's a woman of integrity. She's called Vashti. And she thought, I'm not coming into this unsafe environment with a bunch of drunk officials and they're wanting to leer over me. I'm not doing it. And of course, we know the story that he disposes of her because he listens to his aides. He disposes of her. And so he now is looking for a wife. Opportunity knocks. Okay? So First point, recognize the opportunity when it comes. An opportunity can catapult you into the next season, but you have to recognize the opportunity it is. And an opportunity is something that is presented to you and you have a choice. Are you going to take it or are you going to leave it? Are you going to go or you're not going to go? And so you have to look out for this. And although we sometimes are in a situation we think, I don't know, is this God or is this not God? We have to learn to discern and learn to recognize, where is this opportunity come from? Has this opportunity come from a good source or not from a good source? How many of you know that there's good choices and there's God choices? We always have to look for that God choice, not the good choice. There's lots of good things to do, but we have to see what's God's heart, what's his plan for everybody. And so, although God is absent, like I said, his fingerprints are everywhere. And you know, if we could have had a song, I love worship songs, if we could have had a song that speaks about this, it's like, you are here moving in our midst. I worship you. You are here working in this place. You know the words from Waymaker. And he was still the Waymaker, the miracle worker, the promise keeper, the light in the darkness. In this dark land of Persia, God is moving and he is working and he is doing things. I love this thing, and you might want to write down or note it. God is in the background working for the foreground. He's making plans. He might be behind scenes. You know, when you go to see a play, you know, you look at the stage and you're like, wow, everything looks amazing. You don't see the flurry of activity behind where people are moving bits and getting things ready and sorting things. And that's what God is doing. Sometimes you're like, I don't see you, God. I think you've forgotten about me. You've abandoned me. I'm an orphan in this land. But God is orchestrating and moving things around. And so we have to watch, you know, there is a right place and a right time. And the word happenings, or there just so happened, happens many times in the Bible. I started writing down some of them here. Pharaoh's daughter just so happened to take a bath that day where Moses' basket was. And the Ishmaelites just so happened to be passing when the brothers sold Joseph away. It just so happened that when Ruth and Naomi came back to Bethlehem, it was the harvest time. And we know that whole story. And you know, it just so happened that Jesus happened to be walking and saw Zacchaeus in the tree. There are so many things that we think, oh, was that a coincidence? Why did that happen? But actually, they're all planned by God. And so when I look at this here, there is no coincidence that the Jews have been left behind in Susa, that some of them settled there. That's not an issue. That was just a fact. Some of them stayed there. There is no coincidence that this little girl is, you know, her life has fallen apart. Her mom and dad have died, but someone has looked after her. Someone of influence, someone that has a bigger mind. There's no coincidence there. There's no coincidence that Queen Vashti was disposed of and the king needed to select a new queen. There is no coincidence that God had, when Esther was born with incredible beauty. That was planned inside her mother's womb. The Lord had a plan for what she would look like because he was going to use that talent, that gift that she had in order to save his people. There's just no happenings in God's world. And there's no happenings that Mordecai just so happened to hear that there is a beauty pageant coming up. And then he has this stirring. What would happen if she actually entered the competition? We need to have discernment to recognize an opportunity. And one of the things we need, one of the things with Esther is it says in verse 2, chapter 2, verse 10, and also verse 20, Esther had a teachable spirit and she listened to Mordecai. She was raised by this uncle. She listened to him when he said, I think this would be a good idea. It's an interesting one because Mordecai was not actually doing what he should have done. He should not have been putting her into a position where she was going to be in an environment full of heathens. but something stirred within him. And we have to just look at that and say, well, God must have stirred his heart. God must have stirred her heart. God did something amongst them in order to move them forward. And so recognize the opportunity when it comes. I find it amazing that with 50 million people, the Lord notices 2 Jewish refugees, and he thinks, yep, I've got a remnant left. I can work with that. There might be 25 million, but I can work with this. I'm going to do something great, and something is going to happen to my people. She had the outward gift, but inwardly she had a hidden gift of strength and tenacity and boldness. So the first thing is to recognize the opportunity. The second thing is, how many people know that God opportunities are often disguised in obstacles? Because we always think, yes, it was a bed of roses. No, it wasn't. There were lots of obstacles. Esther had a lot of obstacles. Esther's obstacles were, she was a Jew. They were frowned on. She was a refugee. She was a girl. And she was an orphan. She had a lot of things stacked against her. And some of us sometimes need to remind ourselves that it doesn't matter what's stacked against us. It's who is standing in front of us that is important. Because your past does not define where God is going to take you and where God is going to lead you and where God is going to use you. It's not about what defines you. What does define you? Is it what someone has said about you? Is it the fact that someone spoke badly in your past over you? Is it, have you been diagnosed? These children at school, are constantly, I started writing down all these diagnoses. There's ADHD, ODD, ADD, ADDD, OCD, FAS. I mean, there's so many of them, and they just come off the people's tongues. I remember many years ago speaking to a little boy, and I said, why are you behaving like this? And he goes, he says, well, I've got fetal alcohol syndrome. And the reason I behave like this is because my mom drank alcohol and I behave like this. Someone had told him that and he was living it out. And I was like, no, you have a choice. I am not going to believe that something that happened in your past that you had nothing to do with affects you. And so with every child, with every young adult, with every young person, and with every woman here, it doesn't matter what has been your past. It is what is your future. And you push past those things. You don't care what they say. Even if it's some eloquent psychologist that's spoken or some head teacher that said something or some social worker. No, you're not going to stand for that. You are different. She was an orphan. She couldn't, I'm an orphan. I can't do anything but that. But wow, God provided an amazing uncle for me. And I'm going to celebrate that. So obstacles are often what are couched in, are what... To look at our opportunities, obstacles sometimes surround them, okay? Don't let obstacles define you. Esther learned to discover purpose in her pain. She could have licked her wounds. She could have felt sorry. She could have said, there's no way I'm putting myself there. I'm happy here. I've lost everything. I'm not losing you, Mordecai. I've no one else. She found purpose in her pain. She sought the Lord, and she felt that this was a good thing to put herself forward to. Don't be surprised when you find an opportunity that obstacles will come. Our mission has to be bigger than our sorrows. Our mission in life, the purpose in our life, has to be greater than the obstacles and sorrows that surround us. We have to push through. I was thinking... this week I was talking to some children. I was talking about Mary Slessor. And I thought, well, for the last few weeks, I'll just talk about heroes of the faith. And they all happen to be missionaries. I'm supposed to be doing RE, but I thought, well, this is a good idea. So I was talking about Mary Slessor. She grew up in Aberdeen. She was born here. And one of 7 children to an alcoholic father. Horrible, horrible life. And she had nothing going for her. Dad would come home, drink all the alcohol at the weekends, and there was no money. When she was about 9 or 10, they moved to Dundee, and things didn't get any better there, and the dad eventually died, which she said was a relief, actually, because, then she was able to leave school and go out to work, and they were all able to help each other. And she heard a missionary coming and speaking about Africa, and she thought, I want to go to Africa, but she didn't have much of an education, but she started going to night school. She started working hard. And I'm not going to tell her whole story, but Mary Slessor, if you speak to any Nigerian, they will tell you about Mary Slessor. Mary Slessor went to Nigeria and she did the most incredible work amongst the women there. She stood up against witch doctors because at that time, if you had twins, they would kill the twins and they would often kill the mother because they felt the twins were a spirit child and they needed to be annihilated. And she turned things around. I believe in Nigeria, they do have, I think there's a Mary Slessor Day they celebrate her. She started off as a little girl in Aberdeen from an alcoholic family, and God used her to change a nation and to do amazing things. She's still remembered 150 years later. So God can do incredible things. And I often look at this city and, it doesn't matter your background. Esther might have disqualified herself and said, well, I've come from such a rubbish background. I couldn't possibly be queen. She wasn't even, isn't it amazing that God used someone from the worst background ever, from a Jewish background, from someone that had no security, that elevated her? I look at Leanne and I look at Callum. They didn't grow up in Christian homes. I was speaking to a young girl not long ago, and she said, and she was apologizing because I haven't come from a Christian home. And I said, neither did my mom and dad. You see, it starts somewhere. So Callum and Leanne didn't come from Christian backgrounds. They didn't have they didn't go to mainly music and kids' church and clubs and everything like that. They didn't do that. But God is using them to reach this city. You see, it doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter what's against you. It matters the opportunities that you seize and take. So never forget that. So our attitude has to be more important than our aptitude. Sometimes we lean heavily on our aptitude. Aptitude means that, you've got a talent or a skill in a certain thing. I've got a skill for this. And our attitude to life, our attitude to what God has called us to, has to be greater than what we can do naturally, okay? I love the thing, God does not call the equipped. He equips the called. And never forget that. If you've got the right attitude, you've got a teachable spirit, God can do great things amongst you. She keeps her faith even though she is catapulted into a very, very challenging environment. So we've found out that recognize the opportunity. Don't forget the second thing, that opportunity is disguised in obstacles. The third thing is opportunity is about alignment, not so much about assignment. So when you go into a new season, watch who you align yourself with. Don't get all stressed out about, this is my calling, this is my thing. And you go in all guns blazing. Who are you aligning yourself to? Who is mentoring you? Who is guiding you? Who are you accountable to in this new season? Alignment is more important than assignment. And it just so happened in Esther verse 2, verse 8, and it so happened, here we go, another happening, she was selected and taken into the palace along with 400 others to begin beauty treatments and a selection progress. And there's two people that influence her. One is actually in the palace. He's a eunuch, so he knows nothing about God. His name is Haggai, and he has a special liking for her. Something in his heart is turned towards her. It's not always just Christians turn towards you. Sometimes you can get favor from all sorts of places. She has found favor with this heathen eunuch in the palace. And there's something about Esther that he sees. He's noticing all these girls, but there's something about her. And he gives her special treatment. And she said, I don't want the best of treatment. I'm just going to go with who I am. She has to go through all these processes, but he keeps an eye out for her. He watches her, and he's looking at her and leaning in towards her. And the other person in her alignment is her uncle. She's not forgotten her roots. She hasn't, you sometimes see these celebrities in Britain's Got Talent and that, they get catapulted up and they just don't want to speak about their past because, it's embarrassing. I'm now this new celebrity. No. Every day it says Mordecai, I went by and would watch and see. He would go past and listen and see and watch what happened. How's Esther doing? And I believe Haggai would come and give reports. She had these two men in her life that never left her, and she never left them. She was loyal to him. She never thought, wow, I've been selected. Goodbye, you're not important anymore. No, she always looked for him. And so these two people that she aligned herself with have kept her focused and kept her on the straight and narrow. And what we need to accept in life is who we are, what we have, and where we are. Stop looking sideways. She didn't look at the other 399 girls in that place. You know, there's two ways. I was saying to someone, I always said, you know, with girls, it's very easy. We look sideways and we compare ourselves and, oh, I'm not as good as her. I'm not this, I'm not that. We always are doing that sideways. But there's another way of looking sideways. You can look sideways and go, wow, I am so blessed. I am so blessed. There's two ways of looking. You can look one way and compare and feel worse about yourself, or you can look sideways and go, God, you have blessed me. I'm in this place. Wow. Imagine I was selected. And imagine, God, you're going to use me in this environment. You're going to use me, and you've given me favor here. Look sideways and count your blessings. Count your blessings, name them one by one, and it will surprise you what the Lord has done. Esther accepts correction and leadership. She has a very teachable, soft spirit that aligns herself really sweetly in this area. She has no doubt about the ill-tempered king. His reputation has gone before. She knows everything. She's just taking one day at a time. Maybe she won't be selected, but she will be brought into the audience of the king, and there will be a moment when she is brought in, and we'll see what happens. But she doesn't know. She's just taking one day at a time. And I love this bit. If she has learned to kneel before God in her young life, she's kneeled before God through her obedience and her honoring of Mordecai. And I love this line I read from somewhere. If you first learn to kneel before God, then you can stand before any man. And, you know, she learned in her life, in her young life, to kneel before Almighty God, to respect Mordecai, to never compromise her beliefs inside. And because of that, we're going to find out next week that because she learned to kneel first, she was able to go in and stand before the King of Kings. King Xerxes was known as the King of Kings. So she was able to stand with the King of Kings inside her, in front of the King of Kings in front of her, with great confidence. And you know, the second bit of that song, even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop. You never stop working. The last one here, opportunities from God are always bigger than yourself. Always bigger. Because God, this life of God isn't just a plateau or we go down a little bit. No, he's always wanting to challenge us, bring you on in the journey, take you on into a new level. Your influence needs to be wider, you know. I think of King Street, the influence that King Street had in the little building in the corner of Ockett Road. And I look at this building here, and this building is so much more influential. You know, if you look at it, you know, people go, what church did you go to? I went the one in King Street. Oh, yeah, is there a chip shop opposite? That's it's opposite Morris's. Yeah, I know where that is. Oh, do you know where the old AC's? But oh, is that a church? It's amazing. It's a huge opportunity. I remember when we came to see this, and there was a few of the leaders were coming to walk around the building, and I couldn't go that day because I was childminding and it interrupted nap times. So I remember texting them and said, I'm at home and I'm listening to this song on repeat. Let me see if I can remember the words of it. I wrote it down somewhere and I've forgotten. It's my iPad anyways, but it doesn't matter. It's, God, I look to you. I won't be overwhelmed. Give me wisdom to see things like you do. God, I look to you. You're where my help comes from. Give me wisdom to see things like you do. And I listened to that song on repeat that morning. And I thought, Lord, that's far too big. That's way too audacious. We can't do that. I said to him, I don't know. Could we just buy part of it? You know, isn't it amazing? It was way too big. It was so much larger than I'd ever prayed for, than we'd ever thought about. But you see, God has a different plan. He's working. And so we've walked into this, and I find this building has shrunk. I don't know about you. This building has shrunk. I'm like, yeah. And last week I went to see Andre Rue, and we went to Teka, and I walked in, I said to Ian, I says, maybe this will be our new church building. You know, maybe they'll build another one someday. I walked around, I was like, oh my goodness, how did they ever fit into AECC? It's tiddly. I found myself saying those words. I said, it's so small. And I looked around there and I thought, no, Lord, my faith isn't for this. So that could be Tom and Leanne's issue. They can do that. I don't have enough faith for that. But it's just so funny. When we came here, and I remember listening to that song again, Lord, I look to you. You're where my help comes from. Give me wisdom to see things like you do. Because it was overwhelming for me. And that's what happens with God opportunities. He gives you opportunities that sometimes can be a bit overwhelming. And that's where faith comes in. And that's where you lean in and go, okay, if this is from you, help. And he's like, oh, great, you're in the right place, right attitude, let's go. Okay? Also, opportunities take time. It was 7 years before she went and walked into the king and stood before him. So it was in the 7th year. All that preparation, all that time away from her uncle physically, all sorts of different things were happening. And it was in the 7th year. Opportunities take time, and they're always bigger than you. The verse, Ephesians 3:20, God can do anything, you know, far more than you could ever imagine or guess or request in your wildest dreams. He does it not by pushing us around, but by working within us, his Spirit deeply and gently within us. I think that's a Message version. I quite like that. And that's what I see here. Process is all about timing and God's timing. This isn't just a Cinderella story. This isn't just a rags to riches story. This is a story of divine plan where God is setting things up. He's fixing all the stage for the most incredible salvation of the Jewish people. And we're going to find out about that next week. 3 things, small things about opportunities before I close. Opportunities are bigger than us because they make us God reliant. They make us rely on God in a deep, deep way. The second thing is we have to acknowledge his supernatural abilities. When it comes to it, we operate in the natural, he operates in the supernatural. And the third thing is it stretches us. I am far more confident to come alongside pastors and leaders of other churches and to stand and pray for a building because I know what God has done for us. It's stretched my faith. Yeah, any building, come on. I've prayed with many people over the last few years. God can do the most incredible things if we allow him to. There's no coincidence. Everything is God-ordained providence. Recognize the opportunity. Remember, our mission is bigger than our sorrows. God uses us sometimes in the process of opportunities, either to deliver them or to be part of them and work along with him. Opportunity is about alignment more than assignment, and it's always bigger than us. And there's always going to be some kind of obstacles, but with God on our side, who can be against us? God can take the impossible situation and turn it around for his glory. So that's the story of Esther. That's it set up. So next week we will look about what happens to her, how she gets selected, and how she stands up and speaks. And we've got a few questions on there that we can just talk around in our groups and just to stir your faith. Okay? Thank you.